Hello and welcome to another exciting show. Now, before going any further, I'd like to clear the air regarding what recently happened in a group I belong to. Briefly, an unusual behavioural trait, through no fault of their own, in another very pleasant person, triggered a behavioural trait in me whereby I was assuming, out of sheer ignorance, negative things. That in turn triggered an unfortunate chain of events leading to disharmony within the group. It therefore became a vicious circle based upon accusation and fragmented information. Such a situation brings out the worst in people. In reality, nobody is evil, nobody is bad, nobody is a liar, and nobody is a narcissist, and I don't hold a grudge against anyone. And I hope that sentiment will be reciprocal after polite dialogue. Initially, I was very angry with what happened, but not now. I now have far more knowledge of the situation than I did a short time ago, and I'm in a far better place. I'm open to speak calmly to anyone from the group, providing they are not disposed to a predisposition. There will be no hate, no venom, no character assassination, and no self-righteousness from me. I just want to lay the matter to rest in a civil manner without embarrassment or duress to anyone. In tonight's show we will be covering the topic of ego. The aim of the show is to highlight a possible weak link in the chain of awake movements that, if left unaddressed, our enemy will certainly exploit it. As this is a live show, some people may inadvertently think we are having a dig at them. That is not our intention, and if it comes across as such, please accept our apology. Many thanks. Good evening, and welcome to another exciting show. And this is, and we've lost Deb. We don't know where she's gone.
Well, she'll be back very soon.
She's gone. And was it that joke about the constipated vicar that sent her off? I just don't know, But and isn't it? Have you noticed how marvellous it is how I do a quick change? And hang on a minute, hang on. She's as Deb.
Hello. I can't do it. I can't do it.
Can't you really? We won't talk about that then, shall we? No, but we've had a bit of technical trouble.
On the screen as it is, I can't do it otherwise.
That's right. No, we've what's happened is Gloria sent through stuff on JPEG, and when we show things on the screen, we can't do it in JPEG. We've got to do it on PDF files.
And the last photo won't convert to a PDF, so I can't do that.
Well, thanks, Deb. You've done really well. And,
sorry about it.
As I said, that's okay. I thought it was the constipated vicar joke that sent you off.
No, I never. I missed
it. But anyway, without more ado, first of all, we've got some call-outs to do before we get on with the show, and we've got two people and a machine. You see, we've got John Hamer, who's had the FLU. I won't say it yet. Yes, and he's got a computer that it needs actual being seen to, like kicked out the window. And also we've got Michelle, who's up in Bolton, who's just getting over the old it's a bug that's going around, and I don't know quite what it is.
It's not a good one.
Well, it's weird, isn't it? Because I've had it, and I'm gonna do the top tip as well. So let's have a call out. So we'll have healing thoughts to Scarbados and Bolton Nados.
Yes.
So here it comes. Here we go. See, we have healing thoughts. Here we are. Really nice, positive. So John will get better soon, and his computer will accidentally fall out the window. No, it won't. No. And Michelle in Bolton will. So that helps. Here we are. So that's it. So they're better. And the top tip for this week, and I'm not trained in medical or anything like that, is if you've got the bug, which is, giving you lots of, if you're posh, it'll be mucus. And if you're common, like it's snot.
Snot.
Snot, yeah. And if snot was like gold, I'd be quite rich by now.
I would actually, yeah.
Yes, it'd be quite good. You know, what's the snot forecast today? Oh, it's snot's up today. You know, but what you do, you see, this is from Dr. Mandel. If you want to see it, you see, is when you got a cold, the worst thing to do is blow your nose, because last week I live on air.
I remember, yeah.
Yeah, so hello. You don't get that on many shows, do you? Someone doing a very live performance of blowing your nose. And I found out in this last week, I've been doing it wrong all these years. And apparently, when you blow your nose, if you blow your nose 2 nostrils like that, it can cause a hell of a lot of problems with your sinuses and all up here and all over the place.
Right.
And what you must do, you get a handkerchief. Before handkerchiefs were invented, people didn't blow their noses. Ugh. So what you do, you press one side in and put your handkerchief up and just gently get the mucus or snot out. Then you do the other one.
Right.
And the other one is hold your nose there for 30
Just
seconds.
under the bridge.
Under the bridge, like that, for 30 seconds. And I found it worked for me. And the other one is you push your nose sideways.
Right.
And you push that like that.
After you open your sinuses.
For 30 seconds. And you do the same the other side like that. And you know, it worked a treat. It really did.
Yeah, because it drains it elsewhere, doesn't it? It drains it down,
that's right.
back. Yeah.
That's right. So without more ado, we're all queued up. We're going to talk tonight about ego, but we found shall we say, we're at war, aren't we? I think we'd all agree on that. And if you went to one of these truth movement marches or anything like that, and you went up to someone and said, excuse me, who is our enemy? You would get a different answer from each person. They say, oh, well, yes, it's these, and it's them, and it's them, and it's this, and it's... But this is the only war where you don't know the enemy. Because once upon a time, it was that lot coming towards your lot who are going to kill your lot if you don't kill that lot first. That's simple, easy, you know, not now. Because our enemy is in the shadows and talks behind closed doors. And I've got one word for our enemy: psychopaths. And it doesn't matter what religion, what nationality they are, psychos, but not all psychos. A certain breed of psychopath who are a very elite breed. And some people say it's the pharaohs that never disappeared. And there's a lot of good argument for it. And are still around. Have you heard that one, Gloria?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, there's so many theories, as you say.
There's a lot of evidence for it because of the old back of the heads and all that. It's quite interesting, but I don't know much about it. But the big problem is that the only chance we've got of survival is with the truth movements. And we've got to be self-critical, and we've got to not the weakest link in a chain. Well, let's face it, a chain, it's only as strong as its weakest link. And Gloria has noticed, and several of us, a weak link. And that weak link we've got to be self-critical about and say, how are we going to not, shall we say, let our enemy exploit it? So over to you, Gloria. You've noticed this weak link. And so what's your feelings about this? I mean, you've written a book about it, haven't you?
Yeah. I've been very interested in this weak link for many, many years. I think going back to 2006. And essentially, the weak link affects people in countries like Britain, America, Australia, and Canada. And the thing that unites these 4 countries, I'm not talking economics here, this is all psychology. What unites these 4 countries is the fact that they are all hyper-individualistic countries. In fact, the most individualistic country in the world is America, followed by Australia, and then Blighty, Britain, is the 3rd most individualistic country in the world. And as you said, Chris, this is a time when we're in battle. Does it work? Does a battalion work effectively when everybody's thinking of himself or herself? I don't think so.
No.
We have to somehow merge our forces so that we can fight more effectively against whoever that enemy is. And being an individualistic country, a hyper individualistic country, doesn't make that easy. So, in my humble opinion, the weak link is the fact that Britain is such an individualistic country. As I said, the third most individualistic country in the world. And the typical feature of individualistic countries, this is absolutely fine and dandy. Well, not so fine and dandy when the going is good, but even there it can be a problem. But it becomes very problematic when times are difficult and you need to get your battalion working as one single force. Because in an individualistic society, people are thinking of me. It's what benefits me rather than what benefits, well, I would say us, because that's grammatical, but rather than what benefits we. So essentially, we're a me society. We very much, all individualistic countries are very driven by self-interest. And somehow I think we need to find a way of getting rid of the me or the ego, as you said, Chris, and merging this into the we or the us. And
Can I cut in a little bit
of individualistic.
Sorry, but if I could cut in a little bit there. We're not really talking about communism, because communism is, in its sense, individualism. It sounds weird, but it is.
Yeah. No, we're not definitely not talking about communism. No. And I'd like listeners, viewers, to imagine a kind of continuum, a straight line, if you like. At one end, picture individualism at one end, one extreme end of that line. That's a very me-focused, ego-focused society. At the other end, picture collectivism, which is a we society. I'm not suggesting that we aim to sort of whiz along this line and go right to the other end. I'm just suggesting that we nudge ourselves a little bit away from the extreme end of individualism and move gently towards the collectivist end. People who live in individualistic countries or cultures tend to believe that independence, competition, and personal achievement are the most important things. That's not helpful when we're in a battle. We need to find the source of our strength in coming together, in merging our self-interest into a greater interest, one that will serve our individualist interests through a higher end. Let me give you another example. Many people will be aware of the work of Vandana Shiva, an absolutely wonderful woman in India, who I would say has very little ego. If you watch any video with Vandana Shiva, she's a lovely, smiley person, and she single-handedly has basically rid India of GM crops and food and seeds. Can you imagine this achievement on the part of one person? How did she do it? We had the Monsanto lobby in India selling their seeds for many years. And many people are aware of the fact that this literally led farmers to commit suicide in India because they'd been promised amazing crops. They'd been promised that the seeds would pay back the value that the farmers would pay for them in amazing crops. And actually none of this materialized. The crops, the yields that resulted from these seeds it was a horror story which led many Indian farmers to commit suicide.
Yeah.
And single-handedly, Dr. Vandana Shiva, I believe she has a PhD in quantum physics, but her human soul is what did it. She brought people together in India to collect natural seeds, to create seed banks with natural seeds. And by appealing to people's greater interest, in other words, the way that by coming together, they could help each other, they managed to get rid of Monsanto altogether.
Yeah.
And she did something very similar when, in a part of India, I believe it was near the Himalayas, some industrialists actually built a concrete works in this beautiful part of India. And this was destroying the environment. And again, she galvanized people in that area. She appealed to their hearts, not just to their minds. She appealed to their hearts and mind. And amazingly, they managed to get the concrete work shut down and things returned to the position before. And the arguments they used were about the greater good, about the fact that the concrete works would okay, it might put money in the pockets of the industrialists, but it would do inordinate damage to the environment around. So what she was appealing to was this greater collectivity, much more than just the interests of the industrialists. She was talking about the knock-on effect on the environment and the future of all of those who lived in that area. So when I say that the weakest link is individualism, well, it is, because if we just live by our own self-interest, how can we possibly move forward to a better world? So I hope that answers your point, Chris, that in my view, the weakest link is in individualism. I've been very conscious of this for many years, and I can talk at some point, when you like, about some of the research I've done, which actually show the immense benefits of nudging along towards collectivism, which won't be easy in Britain, because this is the third most individualistic country in the world. But when we come to see that actually we are stronger when we do that, then I think mind over matter, there's no limit to what we can do.
Well, you're right, but you see, this is why I said earlier. People think, oh, individualism. Oh, if we do away with that, we'll go communist. Well, that's wrong, because communism was very individualistic in a weird way. You see, this is the thing, because extreme capitalism is communism, and really, my attitude. I'm into free enterprise, which is different to extreme capitalism, because free enterprise, the little man opens his shop, the little man helps things. But when he was talking about India, they are more family orientated.
It is a collectivist country.
So they're more that mindset, isn't it, really?
They are collectivists. People live together across generations. They support the extended family. So, yes, you're right to point that out. Vandama Shiva had an easier time, let's say, in India than she might have here in Blighty, certainly.
When you look at, I mean, you look at, say, World War II, people sort of pulled together then, and I think in many ways something went a bit strange in the 1960s onwards, because that's when you had the Frankfurt School advising governments, and they were advising governments. I mean, why I've heard it is that the Frankfurt School, they were kicked out of Germany in the 30s, and they went to America, and they advised American government on denazification in 1945. But it was like a Pandora's box. They should have said, okay, they've done that, and we'll stop. They didn't, and it's gone on and on and on and on and on. And now we've got men saying that they're women, and women saying that they're men, and it's going absolutely bonkers. And everybody's frightened of offending everybody else, because it was a collective thing that Germany had to be, as a nation, ashamed of what had actually happened. And this was all from the Frankfurt School. But it didn't stop. As I say, it was like Pandora's box. It's like anything. You start something, you've got to have a beginning and an end, but it didn't end, and it carried on, and it mutated and mutated and mutated. And now it's mutated to such an extent that it's just gone completely and utterly bonkers. It really has. And one of my theories is that, going back to ego, the egotists have been allowed to rule the nest. And I've seen this happen several times in my life. And what happens, you get a kind of groupthink situation. And what happens, the egotist comes along, and he's like the conductor of an orchestra. And the rest of the group become like the orchestra. And if anybody plays a bum note, which they don't want to do because they're terrified of doing it, they'll stick out. So they will go along with the conductor.
Yeah.
They will go along with this groupthink. And I'll hold the flag up. I think we've all been guilty of groupthink at some time in our life. And you get this kind of collective attitude that, I'll give you an example. Many years ago, there was a contractor where I worked. The chap was going through a divorce, and the work crap, excuse my language, this contractor was doing. And in a meeting, this poor sod was savaged, basically. He was the scapegoat because the project itself was on the rocks. And as the contract bloke, I was in there. I was sitting in the meeting. Now, I was kind of on the outside, and I could have defended this chap. I could have said, well, he's not that bad, this, that, and the other. But if I'd have done that, I'd have been the scapegoat.
Yeah.
My contract would not have carried on.
Yeah.
Even though I was sort of representing the client in many ways. So what is that cowardice? Is that self-preservation? Is this kind of, because I say you had the I wouldn't say bullies, the egotists,
Yeah.
They're the conductors, and everybody else was playing along, and I'm sitting there sort of quiet, talking, I know when the bread's buttered.
I'd say that's more self-preservation.
Self-preservation.
Yeah, I would too.
Yeah.
And this is what happens when you get this situation. Everybody will vote. And this is what's happening in Parliament, and because I've got no time for government, but in industry generally, is that people are going, in the universities especially, the egotists are taking over. And they'll say, right, we'll do this. And it's a bit like a judge. They actually advise the jury which way to vote in many ways. And the egotists are not advising, they're telling the rest of the group what to think. And the rest of the group, they can be very intelligent, but they will think that, because they won't say, well, I think this is, no. They don't want to be a scapegoat. And you notice this in dysfunctional families. A dysfunctional family needs a scapegoat, and they'll all go for that scapegoat. And I found that in the profession I was in, and that sometimes some of the places you work, they were like dysfunctional families. So this is really what happens.
Yeah.
And I just wonder what what do you think about this, Gloria or Deb?
Go on, Gloria.
I agree. When you have authoritarian leadership with the egotist at the top, not to say a psychopath, then things, the outlook is not good. That's for sure. But when you have an enlightened person at the top, and you have a more inclusive style of leadership, which involves everybody, and as I said before, involves hearts and minds, then you're in a winning situation. And I have to declare an interest in this, because I wrote a book a few years ago on the subject of inclusive leadership. And I came, when I was writing it, I wanted to profile some organizations that were actually living and breathing this non-authoritarian leadership. And would you believe it? I found remarkable examples of this living, breathing, inclusive leadership in Britain. No, seriously, I found a school, Sevenoaks School, which was a Sunday Times top independent school on 2 years, and a part of Royal Mail, the sales part of Royal Mail. They had a leader who had been an egotist of the kind you described, Chris, but he realized, he was a clever man, that actually his sales figures would be more spectacular were he to become less of an egotist and a more inclusive type of leader. And that's exactly what he did. And sales went up and up and up. And Royal Mail has the biggest sales contract in the country if not in the world, the Amazon contract. And they relaxed the restrictions on staff. So previously, people in the sales department who were talking to clients, they'd been on a very strict time limit as to how long they were allowed to talk to clients. And that was relaxed because the sales director, who reinvented himself, transformed himself, realized that the important thing was to build relationship with the customer. And you couldn't do that against the backdrop of saying, well, actually, hang on, I've exceeded my 3 minutes. I have to get off the call now.
Yeah.
And so this much more human approach really paid dividends. So yes, if we have an egotist at the top, which is often a narcissist and a psychopath, we're on a hiding to nothing. We can't be successful.
I've actually got an example. When I first started working in mental health, the team that I joined, they were arguing constantly. The boss was like, I'm in charge, and you do as I say. And it was just like, it was horrible, a horrible atmosphere. We were kind of sneaking into corners and talking, and nothing was out in the open. And anyway, he left, and we got a new manager. She'd been a deputy manager. We got a new manager, and the whole dynamic changed. It was like she was so relaxed, let you get on with what you were doing, let you make your own decisions, and the whole thing shifted. And you could tell the whole place was different. There was more, because it was more relaxed. We could, like I said, we could do our own thing so long as what we thought we were doing was right. We didn't have to ask permission to do anything, like make phone calls to psychiatrists or anything. We could take it off on our own bat. We could anything, and it just made the whole house was completely different. So yeah, it's true, because my ex-boss was an egotist. It was like, look where I am, look who I am.
So we need to turn it on its head, and instead of having a pyramid type structure, have the inverted pyramid, where the leader is the servant to those below.
Yeah,
correct.
That's what you're describing. It's called servant leadership.
Yeah.
But also, though, I've found egotists, some of them are suffering from within, and they're not necessarily psychopathic or anything like that. It could be that they're actually insecure. And you look what's happened over the last 2 or 3 years, the amount of little dictators you came across. You walk through like, well, we're in this. They're frightened people. They're very frightened people. They're insecure. That's their insecurity.
Yeah.
And the trouble is, they kind of, I think, because of they lack manners often. Yeah. And they're just deliberate attitude. I'm going to do this. I'll do that. Yeah. People tend not to say anything. They'll just get away with it because they're brash. They'll, I'll do this. I'll do. And there was a thing. I call it is-a-lad. And you think, what's it is-a-lad? That is, it's generally men. You do get women egotists, and they are, well, you get both men and women egotists. But I've usually found that a lot of these egotists, they can get away with murder almost, because they say, oh, he's a lady, he's a, and they're backing them because the people backing them are frightened. And there was a place where I worked once where a chap ran a sweepstake for everybody. So we all put so much money in per week. And he was a crafty character, and he was he's a lady, does this, he's a boy, and all that sort of rubbish. And we came up, and we was all due, I can't remember the exact figure, but something like 50 quid each, which is not bad. Yeah. And he put it on the next week.
Without asking?
Without asking. And do you think he did? No, he didn't. He was pocketing it. But nobody, but everybody was, he's a laddie, put it on the next stall the next week. Whoa, he's a boy. And nobody's saying, oi, did you bloody pocket this? Now, if your eye was to do that, would have been booted out. Yeah. Well, you conned all these people. But this is a lad sort of attitude. They get away with it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've got a cousin that's like that. I can say that because the bastard's not looking in, excuse my language. But he's, it's his way, isn't it? Yeah, he's like that. He's brash.
He's like that. Yeah, that's the excuse.
Look at a certain person. No, I won't mention his name because he's got better lawyers than anything else. But he's a very famous businessman, and he's got there because he's brash. He's arrogant.
Yeah. I know what you mean.
Yes.
From this country.
Yes. He's rather sweet, saccharine type of person, isn't he?
Yeah.
Yes. I think we know what you mean.
I do.
But, yes. But you're saying before we came on air, or when we were talking on the phone, that you're talking about a former communist country. Was it Slovakia and Australia?
No, it was actually Slovenia.
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 Yeah.
Shall I talk about that bit of research?
Yes.
As I say, I was interested in this weak link, and the way I got interested initially was somebody said, well, why don't you look at people in universities, because I was working in a university then, and see if they feel isolated. Well, I thought that sounded rather Swedish. I feel alone, sort of thing. But I thought, well, I'll do this. It sounds intriguing. So I carried out a number of one-to-one interviews with people working at a university. What came out of those interviews was astonishing. People said that they felt such an acute sense of isolation that sometimes it led them to feel suicidal, that they had no support in what they were doing. They were saying that the students had more support than they, as academics, had, and that when their research was difficult, they, as I say, could feel suicidal. And coming away from that project, I thought, this is incredible. And around about that time, I also read a book by a psychiatrist called Yalom, and Debs may know about him. He wrote a book called Love's Executioner, which is a collection of stories about the people he's treated.
Yes.
And one of the stories involved an academic who'd worked with an overseas academic and really enjoyed the experience. And they published, they worked together jointly on research. And the academic number one submitted it to an academic journal for review. And when he got the rejection back from the journal, he couldn't bring himself to tell the overseas colleague that they'd been rejected. And he'd got so much out of that relationship. And he really found himself becoming more and more and more depressed because he'd lost a valuable relationship. He felt he'd let down the other man because the paper hadn't got published. And eventually he saw Yalom for advice because over this period of time, a letter had actually arrived from academic number two. And academic number one couldn't bear to open it up because he thought he would be rebuked. And eventually he saw Yalom. And by this stage, the man wasn't leaving his house. He'd really worked himself up into such a state of depression. I don't know if this sort of resonates with you. And he had no support from his workplace. And then he saw Yalom. And eventually, Yalom did what, of course, you would hope he would do. He opened the letter from the other man. And actually, there were two surprises. The first was the fact that the professor said it didn't matter, that the paper had been rejected. This happens all the time. And the second was an announcement in the letter that the professor had since died and passed away. But the academic number one, had worked himself up into this terrible frenzy of depression. And so, fresh from that study that I'd conducted myself with a Polish colleague called Krzysztof Kobacki, I thought, well, what could lie behind this terrible isolation that afflicted the people in the university I was talking to, but also this academic that featured in Yalom's story. And I thought maybe it's the individualism that I talked about earlier in Britain. Do you remember we were saying that Britain is the third most individualistic country in the world? And I don't think individualism has been in Britain forever. As you said, Chris, I came across a quote from Edmund Burke in the 18th century, who was an Irishman, and he described individualism as a force that could make a community crumble away and be disconnected into the dust. And all you'd be left with would be the power of individuality. It's not a very nice thing he's describing there. So fresh from this study, interviewing these academics at a university, it was actually based in Wales, this university. I thought, well, let's do a study. And what we did was a very simple methodology. We thought we'd write to academics in an individualistic country, away from Britain, and in a collectivist country, and simply ask them how they engaged in their research. And incidentally, all the academic literature on the business of doing research and doing it successfully says it relies on knowledge creation. That's fairly obvious, creating new knowledge, and that the best way to do this is through teamwork. That's very clear in the literature on how to, maximize knowledge creation. So we sent a survey off to an individual academics in an individualistic country, and for that we chose Australia, which, as I said earlier, is the second most individualistic country in the world. And we selected a collectivist country which was economically prosperous, so if you like, on a par with Australia economically. And the country we selected was Slovenia. And we sent off surveys to academics in these countries. And I'm pretty collectivist, I think, in the way I look at the world. We were 4 people involved in this study. And we got replies back from the academics in Australia and Slovenia. And I'm looking here for some quotes because I really must read you. It was so interesting and so astonishing, I would say, what we found. Let me just look at this. We sent the questionnaire to 900 academics in Australia and Slovenia. So it was a fairly big study. And what did we find? We received responses from 34 Australian academics and 31 Slovenian academics. So it was fairly balanced, the responses. And that was a good response rate, by the way. It was 7% response rate, which is higher than the minimum response rate for a study that you might regard as valid and reliable. What did we find? Well, I'm going to give your viewers a moment to think about it. One of these 2 countries, we also asked them, well, let me go through this systematically. We asked them 2 questions, essentially. One, did they do most of the work, their research, on their own or in a group? Question number 1. And question number 2 was, what was their research output per year in terms of published papers? So your viewers might like to consider for a moment, which of these 2 countries, Australia or Slovenia, and for Australia you can read Britain because they're very similarly individualistic. Which of these 2 countries do you think had academics with the highest research output? Was it Slovenia or was it Australia?
I know the answer, so I'll keep quiet.
I would have said Australia. I'd have said Australia.
Well, you might think so. What actually we found was that the academics in Australia, typical responses, when we asked them, do you do your work on your own or in groups? And remember that the literature on knowledge creation recommends teamwork. Do you remember me saying that?
Yep.
Here are typical Australian responses, straight from these surveys. Here's an Australian. I'm not going to try the accent. Maybe Chris would like to summarize it with an accent. Here's an Australian academic. Ideally, he says, I would like to do research by myself. But this simply isn't possible all the time with teaching, admin, and other commitments. Here's another Australian academic. I do some of the most profound work when I am working on my own, he or she says. I'll just give you 2 more Australian responses. I find research teams are too restrictive and not necessarily engaged with my particular research interests. And then the last glimpse that I'll give you into the mind of an Australian academic is typically I work on my own in a small department. I find it difficult to get support or invitations to work in a team. So you get a sense that these were typical responses from Australia, these people like to work on their own. They'll work with others if they have to. Yep. Let's move now to Slovenia, collectivist country. Here's some typical Slovenian responses. Discussion is crucial for me. Therefore, I like to work with a colleague. The institution of mine is small, and I do not have colleagues with similar interests. That is why I try to stay in touch with colleagues from other institutions. So here's somebody making an effort, unlike the Australian, to reach out. They talked about non-stop brainstorming with other people, sharing experiences, better discussion, better results, comparing different solutions, exchange of information, exchanging opinions, exchange of ideas, diversification of knowledge, different views, thinking, different capabilities. I enjoy working with other people. Mutual motivation, stimulating environment. In actual fact, it was Slovenian academics that had a higher research output than Australians. And I can quite understand why you might think Australia would have a higher research output depth. But actually, I think this experience shows us that it doesn't pay to be an individualist. And just as the literature on knowledge creation told us, the best work is done in teams. Because you can promise that, you can draw on different diverse opinions and so on.
Yeah.
And I remember years ago, one evening I stayed in my office late when I was starting to think about this, what's optimum, an individualistic or collectivist research environment? And I thought, I know, I'll look at Nobel Prizes and see whether most prizes are awarded to people working on their own or people working in teams. And at that stage, I thought, it must be people working on their own, because one of the most famous scientists of all time is Einstein. And here's somebody who did all their work on their own, or so I thought. I then started to read about Einstein, and it was getting later and later in my office that evening, and I couldn't prise myself away from the computer, because what I discovered, and I suspect that from Chris's expression that he knows this already, there was somebody in the background who was working with him, and I hadn't been taught about this person in the background, who was none other than his wife. Yes, his wife, Mileva Maric, was a fine, top-notch mathematician. She was the only woman that was admitted to the technical institution where she did her maths degree. And there's somebody called Professor Joffe who said that he saw the very first papers written on relativity, and they had two names on it. He said that of Einstein and that of his wife.
Yeah.
So I'm sitting there, it must be 11 p.m. by now in my office. And then I moved to DNA, the story of DNA. And I can talk about that if you want, or we can talk about that another time. But that also is a story of really the clash between the ego needs of researchers and the needs to develop our understanding on DNA. I mean, it's a fascinating story, which I can describe in a few minutes if you like. It's a rather horrific story, the story of DNA.
Yes, please, yes. Far away, yes. This is fascinating.
We know that 3 men got the Nobel Prize for discovering the DNA molecule and showing the double helix. Yeah. And they were Watson, Crick, and Wilkins. So to a man, if you'll excuse the pun, they were all from individualistic societies. Watson was from America, which I said was the most individualistic country in the world. Well, I haven't said that. A wonderful social scientist called Gert Hofstadter, who's done a lot of work on this, he has established that fact. So Watson was from America, Wilkins was from Britain, And Crick was from New Zealand, which I imagine is a bit like Australia.
Yeah.
And Wilkins was working at King's College University in London at the same time as a lady, Dr. Rosalind Franklin. Some people may have heard of her, some may never have heard of Dr. Rosalind Franklin. She was British born. She went to Paul's School in London, and then I think she went on to either Oxford or Cambridge, and then she went on to do a PhD. And eventually, she's still fairly young at this stage in her career, she found herself there in King's College London, the same place as Professor Wilkins. She was a more humble academic at that stage. And she arrived during the summer, I think it was, yes, it was definitely during the summer. And the head of the laboratory at King's College London, because she had a specialism in photographing molecules, assigned to her the task of looking into the DNA molecule. If you look up photos of Rosalind Franklin, you'll see, I think there's something very special and rather magical about her face. It looks a face that's full of curiosity. And so she got straight into the task that summer. Now, when term started again in the autumn, Professor Wilkins came back to discover that this job, which he thought was his, had been given to this, if you like, upstart young academic, Rosalind Franklin, Dr. Rosalind Franklin, and he wasn't less pleased. So she's there beavering away, and eventually she actually produces the first ever photograph showing the double helix of the DNA molecule. Now, unbeknown to her, Professor Wilkins, who is in touch with a rival team at Cambridge, consisting of American Watson and New Zealander Crick, they're both at Cambridge. Wilkins, her colleague, if we could call him that, at King's College London, unbeknown to her, takes her photograph of the DNA molecule to the rival team at Cambridge. You look shocked, Debs. It is a shocking story. And when they saw, because they were also investigating the DNA molecule, and I believe that Watson and Crick pipped her to the post by about a week for their article on the DNA molecule. And Rosalind Franklin went on, they say, to develop ovarian cancer, possibly on account of the chemicals that she was using for her special techniques in photographing molecules. She developed ovarian cancer and died just a very relatively short period after this whole debacle, leaving the three men free to collect the DNA, the Nobel Prize for their discovery of the DNA molecule.
Yeah.
Nobel Prizes cannot be awarded
posthumously, yeah.
Yes, after someone's death.
What's that
So,
say?
and Rosalind Franklin was completely airbrushed out of the whole narrative. Now, when you look at that story as you know, what does it tell you about teamwork?
Yeah. These
are three men from highly individualistic countries. They should have pooled their resources.
Yeah.
So it is actually very difficult to engage in successful teamwork, I would say, in individualist kind of. And so here we are, going back to what we were saying at the beginning. We're in a battle. We're not too sure who the enemy is. We know what the problems are. We need to come together, do we not? And individualism, I think, will very much stand in our way. So somehow we have to find a way of nudging ourselves along and seeing self-interest as being served by the bigger interests of the group.
Yeah.
A bit like we found happening in India with Vandana Shiva. But she had an easier time in India, as you said, Chris, because that's starts out as a collectivist.
I can hear I realise what you're saying, because I mean, I am not a team player. I'll be very honest with you there. I'm more of an individualist person.
Yeah.
More people don't believe it, but I'm very much an introvert. And what happens, I've found in the profession I come from, that is a very individualistic type thing, because you'll have a meeting where there'll be a design problem or something like that, and you might have you'll sit around trying to sort of work out a difficult design, and that's what I make my folding stuff doing, working out difficult designs. And then you go away on your own, you go into a little other way, and then you sort of work something out.
Yeah.
But strangely enough, by what you're saying, I've found that it depends on who's actually running the office, because I was freelance. I used to go down different offices. You go in some places that are like the dysfunctional family, and the scapegoat was always a contract bloke, and you knew it, and you thought, here it comes, working away and thinking, and the old joke was cry all the way to the bank, just work out how much you're earning. And then you go to other places where there'll be somebody, like you said, Gloria, who rules things not from the top, but from the bottom upwards, and that type of thing. And I think that it all depends on the kind of atmosphere of the place. And I used to find that, you put your foot through the door and you think, don't like this. You're
right. Well, and Debs gave this fabulous example earlier of how the group was transformed by a new leader. And when I was doing that research into isolation, do you remember when I was interviewing all those academics, I didn't say earlier that there was one section of the university which was a complete exception, and that was the nursing section, where the section that was teaching nursing. And it seemed as though they had their own kind of microclimate there, and there was nobody felt isolated there. They were endlessly partying and in and out of each other's office. It's a very, very different environment.
Yeah.
So you can actually do a lot, and I know this from my experience, because my background before I went into the academic world was as a training and development manager, trying to create good cultures for organizations. There's a tremendous amount you can do. That's a very good news story. But the last thing you'd want is an egotist at the top. I think we all agreed on that, aren't we?
Definitely.
Well, that's right. And I mean, I've actually found that you could find this sort of like group formation setting in. And I call it group formation because, like I was saying earlier, like the conductor and the orchestra, you found it in some sort of places. But also, like what you were saying earlier, now, I was in management at one point, and as far as I remember, I never fired anybody. And if there was a falling out in the office or anything like that, I've worked in offices where people have fallen out, and the so-called senior people would take sides. Yeah, you said this, you said that, I do this, you do that. Right? And that is the ego. But the way I've worked on things is that if there was a falling out, I'd get an individual either side into an office on their own, cup of coffee, sit back, would not show any bias at all, and say, what's your side of the story? And just listen to them. Not mention anything, wouldn't say, well, you said this, that. No, I just keep quiet and just let them speak. Then I get the other person in, cup of coffee, all relaxed, speak it through, and I'd say very politely, well, I hear what you say. I don't agree with a fair amount what you said in a polite way, but if we could try and work it out. And quite honestly, it worked. And I'm not sort of showing off or anything or blowing my own trumpet or anything like that, but because it's up to other people to judge me, but it seemed to work because I tried to get people happy. And hello, the camera's gone off again. Here it goes. It come back again. Here it goes. Does this every week.
It's black.
Hey, we can have bets on what time it's going to do it. It's a bit late this week, but everybody knows. But the fact of the matter is that I always like to crack a gag, always be having a laugh, happy-go-lucky, and I'm not really management material. I admit that, but it was a case of what I always got a contract for you, Chris. Really, or not really management material. How much? I'll do it.
Yeah.
Mercenary, and we call us architectural mercenaries. You go in and do a job, and the fact of the matter is that that's the way, and at least the office was happy because I was always cracking gags. But but our output, I think, was pretty good compared with others because we was sort of, they know what knew I was a walkover really easy, People walk all over me, but that's the way I am, sort of classic. But I found though that by but that situation, I diffuse play things, and I just say, well, look, I know you don't want to shake hands with each other, but we've got to work together. Shall we try and just be, just ignore each other if you want, but let's try and ease this one through, and would never take sides, ever take sides in anything.
See, that's very interesting, because I think what you're creating there is a very safe environment, or what you created there. It was a very safe environment, and Google, for all its sins, seems to be quite good at managing staff and creating a very creative environment for its staff. And they have this notion of psychological safety. That's a core concept in the organisation, which they try and ensure is present at all times. And I think that's what you were creating there, Chris. You didn't fan things up. You showed people that you had time to listen to their concerns, and that you weren't taking sides. And that was making it very safe. And one of the things that I read about with Google was that there was a manager who had been diagnosed with cancer, and he decided to take his team out on an away day. And he talked to his team about the diagnosis of cancer. He opened up to his team, and he created the kind of psychological safety that made it possible for the other people in his team to then open up in turn. And of course that changed relationships in a very positive way. So it's very good to hear about something like that, which can diffuse problems.
That's the thing. It diffused it, and you might be talking to somebody you don't particularly like, but you just act neutral. I think that's the best thing. Don't take sides, because there's always three versions of events: one side, the other side, and what really happened. So, and I'm not sitting there as a judge or a jury or anything like that. I'm just trying to get things moving
on an even keel.
Well, that's right. Actually, under a lot of pressure.
And it allows people to think clearly, because when all that emotion comes into play, critical thinking goes out of the window, and
that's right.
You end up somewhere rather unpleasant.
Yes.
Well, I think that also I found that humour worked to diffuse a lot of things, because I was always cracking gags, and really what it was because you're under a heck of a lot of pressure to produce, a heck of a lot of pressure. And when you're designing things, you sometimes look at an impossible design, and I've always said there's no such word as can't. You'd have hope come to you, so I can't do this. Well, there's no such word as can't. We've got to do it. So whatever happens, we've got to do it. So there's no such word. And a lot of people in sort of those positions sort of go, "Oh, look, you better," but no, I sort of do it in a laughing way, and I sort of crack a joke. So look, we've got to get this done. So that's it. So even though I'm not a team player, but I think what it is having feelings. That's what you're saying, Lloyd. People have feelings for other people. And are you really saying we're really going back to before the Industrial Revolution, when people did have feelings for others? I mean, there was no charity as such, but you didn't really need that much charity, because if somebody in the village was hitting hard times, the other villagers or their family would help them in many ways. We hear about poverty, the extreme poverty, but you hear more of that in the Victorian times than you do
in Britain.
In the 18th century.
Vastly more collectivist than it is now. And famously, we remember Mrs. Thatcher saying, there is no such thing as society. And so that forced people very much away from the group again, into the individual. I think we need to turn the clock back, don't we? If we're creating a better world, which is what we're aiming to do, we must put the clock back socially, in terms of how we relate to each other, and not just see other people as opportunities that will further our own.
What about people that assume leadership, though? What about people that assume leadership, who are generally egotists?
Well, we mustn't have those sort of people. They must not be selected into leadership positions.
But the thing is, they get there because they're audacious. They've got such an audacity. They will.
I mean, it can seem attractive, but I suppose we just have to be a bit wiser and not
Well,
fall for it.
yeah.
What do you think, Debs?
How many times have we seen people that we think they'd make a brilliant leader, and they get into the leadership role, and it's like the ego takes over. So you can't even say, "Oh, we'll keep them out," because sometimes it happens the other way, doesn't it? Where they get in, and then all of a sudden it's like, "Who is this person? We didn't vote this person in." It's a bit of a tricky one, really.
It is, but also
No,
I was
I
in a
think
position.
we want an inclusive leader who will listen to people, but be firm and fair.
Yeah.
A bit like Chris was when he talked to
Yeah.
those two people. But we don't need hyper individualists, and we must see that our self-interest actually lies in finding a collective solution, and not endlessly be seeking to profit from the other people in the group.
Yeah.
Because then we're back on ourselves, and how can we then move forward and create a collective solution? I'm not talking communists. It's nothing to do with communism. It's just about. But we need to be like those Slovenian academics who prospered because they worked together, and how can we put it? Melded their talents.
Yes.
Look at tribal societies. There's no room for psychopaths. They'll be done in. There's going to be no room for them. They've got to work together. But I mean, I've been in a situation like, for example, little minor things. You'd be in a meeting and they get the catering company come along and bring some sandwiches in. So they've got all the sandwiches and the tea and everything. And you get this egotist, right, I'll be mother, grabs the sandwiches and leaves, half a sandwich for yourself. Yeah, nice things, aren't they? And then you get the "is a lad." Oh, he's a lad. He's get all the sandwiches. If I sandwiches, then it'd be, oh, that's terrible. Oh, what a horrible person. You get all the sandwiches. That's so bad. Oh, that's a terrible thing to do. But "is a lad" can get away with it, and that's what I've found all the way up. You probably found this, Deb. You found this, Gloria. The female, I don't know what they feel equivalent of "is a lad" or "she's a girl, isn't she?" Ooh, yeah, do anything, they get away with it.
Yeah, I know.
How comes that type could get away with it, yet the quietly spoken, sort of easygoing sort of Harry type of stuff does?
I'll tell you what I have come across.
Yeah.
The people that cock things up, like, for instance, we had to put medications up, and there was one person in particular that cocked the medication up. I mean, you've got to be so careful every week because you put it up for the week. And every week, without fail, he'd put either an extra tablet in or he'd forgotten a tablet. And I'd say something like, "What am I like?" Well, yeah, what are you like? It's like they're admitting that they've done it wrong, but it's okay, I can get away with it. And it's those sort of people confuse me. It's a bit like I would have been horrified and I'd have said, "Oh God, I'm going to have to really keep my eye on what I'm doing." But every time he was pulled up, it was like, "No, it's just me." Well, that's all right if you're not messing about with people's medication.
Well, that's it. Like you were saying, he's a lad. And also they're normally crap at their jobs because it's insecurity.
Yeah,
they're crap. They're either suffering, or there's something that when I say suffering, it could be emotional distress or something like that. That they're kind of insecure. It's a lot of insecurity, but they get through. This is the most amazing thing. I don't know quite what it is about that type that tend to get to the top. I mean, is there some magic formula?
Well, I would suggest they get to the top in the wrong systems.
Yeah.
I mentioned earlier that I wrote this book on inclusive leadership, and I found these 3 amazing organisations in Britain that were flourishing by virtue of not doing it that way, and they would never have recruited people to the top job who behaved with outrageous ego. I mean, I remember in one of the organisations, which was called Page Group, the managing director chose not to even have an office of his own. Astonishing. You think Page Group is an international recruitment organisation, and many organisations will give their MD a big office, a big desk, a big swivel chair. No, this chap volunteered not to have an office, and he would spend every day with a different group of employees, sitting next to them. Now, can you imagine the benefit of doing that?
Mm.
It means he gets to know everybody. They get to know him. He can identify talent. He can motivate them, encourage them. He becomes very knowledgeable about what's happening, about different clients, different briefs. I mean, that company was going from strength to strength.
That's interesting, because Eisenhower once said, was it about leadership? He said it's getting people to do what they want to do.
Yeah.
That's a very true statement. You're getting people to do what they want to do,
Yes.
what they're good at. And I think a good manager highlights, thinks, well, the person's weak there, they're good at this, they're good at that, and that type of thing. I mean, there are certain weaknesses that we've all got in our different professions. I mean,
there's also strength in encouraging people to work together and not just as individuals. And that takes us back to what we were saying earlier, that we have to some extent submerge our personal interests and not see every group that we're in as an opportunity to further our own self-interest. Now, that's not going to be easy in Britain because, as I say, we're the third most individualist country in the world. But we haven't always been, I don't think. I mean, Chris mentioned the Britain pre-industrial revolution, which was based on cottage industry. And I imagine people were much more collectivist then than they are now. So we're not stuck in this state, are we? We can choose how we want to interact with them.
But I've noticed egos are very good at they're opportunists. So if there's a scapegoat, they will use that scapegoat to further themselves. And I've found in different offices where I've worked, where you've got like a dysfunctional family, and you think, hang on a minute, there's going to be a scapegoat here, and the egotist will capitalize on that and assume leadership and say, you do this, you do that, because they're capitalizing on someone's downfall, because that not only gets them away from their own insecurity because they're looking at the big I am, but they're also kicking on the weaker one. It's a bit like when you see the wildebeest. The lions won't attack the strongest; they'll attack the straggler and the weaker one.
Yeah.
And this is where the egotist comes in. So
and then there's a thin line between that sort of behaviour and bullying, of course. And typically bullies are people with chips on their shoulders and insecurities.
Yeah, the loudmouths, actually.
And we must create bully-free environments.
Shall we go into chat?
Yes.
Because I think we should say, they've got any good ones there.
I'll have a look on here. Wait a minute.
A
bit slow tonight.
Stig, by the way, is Stig, S-T-I-G, is he or she in Australia or New Zealand?
New Zealand.
New Zealand?
It's Paul from New Zealand. He managed to change his name. Yeah. He managed to change his name on YouTube.
Yes. No jokes about sheep. We definitely won't have any sheep jokes tonight, no.
Right. There's a message from Tracy Murray here saying, "Hi Gloria, she said later on she met you when
hi Tracy, yes.
David Noakes.
Yes, I remember you very well.
She wants to know how he is, if you know.
How is he?
Yes.
Yes.
I saw him. I was running a questioning history conference that John Hamer was speaking at.
Yes.
And he came for the day. It was lovely to catch up with him.
Jolly good.
I heard that he'd been recently ill or something. I don't know if he had a stroke or something. He said, I don't know if that's true. I really don't know. It might be a hearsay. I don't know. But, because the way he was treated, him and his girlfriend, they went to jail in France, didn't they? And it was horrendous what happened to him. But I hope he's okay. David Noakes is a good man.
Yes.
I
was very happy to see he looked okay.
Yes. Oh, brilliant. He's still on the circuit? Does he do any talks or anything?
I don't know that he has for a while, but he told me he was happy to talk at a future conference, which I was happy to hear. Yeah.
Come on.
He's got a lot to say. He's got a lot to show.
Oh yes. Mind you, we might get banned, might we?
Yeah, we don't
Bit
want
shoot job. Yeah. Right.
Right, Mike's saying here, too many people in this country do exactly what the media tell them to do. They rely on the system so much they will fight to protect it. And then carries on with, but those in power, the egotists, the psychopaths, will never give up their power. No, because they won't.
Although, we have seen a number of people move away from their positions, haven't we, in the last few years?
Yeah.
So that's quite encouraging. I don't want to name people, but we've had people at the top of politics who aren't there anymore.
Yeah. Oh, in fact, it might goes on again further and say, look at Boris and Trump, Chris, perfect examples.
Yeah. But when you look
politics,
at
obviously.
But when you think about it, supposing we were the elite. Now, as I say, the truth movement has to do everything out in the open, and our enemy does it behind shadows and closed doors because we don't know who the enemy really is. But let's say it's the psychopaths. Now, okay, they're psychopaths, all kinds of creeds and whatever. They want us to fight each other.
Yeah.
Because whilst we're fighting each other, we're not looking at who they are they? And that was how the empires were built.
All the more reason we have to work together.
Yes.
We have to do something about self-interest. It stands in the way.
Well, apparently, that's something I saw that it was on YouTube, and it was pulled from YouTube. And it was very brief. Now, I don't know much about South Africa. I've never been there. But apparently, you've got the Zulus, and there's another tribe that I don't know what it is. And I've spoken to several people that's been to South Africa. That was in the apartheid days. And he said what they did, they stirred up trouble between the Zulus and this other tribe, you see. And they was always warring at each other because whilst the Zulus and the other tribe are fighting each other, they're not looking at anybody else. So you're there as the peacekeepers. Well, what I saw is this really heartening sight of when they had all this, what's happened over the last 2 years, and we won't go into it.
Yes.
Something unexpected has happened because this tribe, who I can't remember the name of, and the Zulus and the white farmers have got together, and it was a fantastic sight. These Zulus marching along the streets, doing their war chants, with the white farmers next to them, and this other tribe next to them doing the same.
Amazing.
And the police going, "Oh shit!
Yeah.
Oh!" And you can see them gradually stepping back, going, "Bloody hell!" And you can always read it on their faces, thinking, "Bastards have got together." It was. And I was almost in tears watching it, thinking, "Wow!" And I don't think the Zulus have had the old what we're talking about.
No, probably not. No.
And but there's another strange thing that I found out. Now, this might be going against the collectivism. What you're saying, Australia has the lowest turnout of something like 11-12%, whereas Britain it's a much higher percent, which is really. That is where individualism probably does work in many ways.
Yes.
We're not going to have this, mate, am I?
Leave that out.
Yes, truth. So
we must hang on to the good things about individualism in terms of the way it fosters critical thinking, because people are happy to have views of their own distinct from the group, but we must try and get rid of those bits that stop us working together. And do you think we can mix elements like that?
Well, look at, Henry Ford, they say he introduced the mass production and got the price of the Ford car down. It was a sort of a loose idea, but the people that were behind it, it's a bit like what you were saying about Christopher Wren. Now, he wasn't actually an architect, but he was known as the architect that designed St. Paul's Cathedral. But when you look at all the drawings, it was all done by technicians, because you get one architect and you get about, depending on the size of the project, about 20 technicians. It's the technicians that actually design all the bits and bobs and that and put it all together. And
shall I give you your viewers the figures? I've got them in front of them. Certainly. This comes from a book. This book called the.
Hang on. Let's do it. Hang on. Can I be a bit smug? Let's try this. Here it goes. Hang on. Head to stream. No, it hasn't done it. Oh, here it is. Yeah.
So here's this book called The Dark Side of Academia, How Truth is Suppressed, which is published by Truth University Press, and I'm that publisher.
Right.
And the author is the secret professor. And on page 113, there's a discussion of who actually designed St. Paul's Cathedral. And all the history books tell us that it was one Christopher Wren, as he became Sir Christopher Wren. But things are not as they seem. And there was a page on the official website of St. Paul's Cathedral called Wren's Draftsman. I say there used to be a page because for some reason it's been taken down now, although the reference to it is shown in the book, because you can actually retrieve quite craftily websites that have been, web pages that have been taken down. But this page, Wren's Draftsman, actually using grant money that the cathedral had received, they actually divided the drawings that they had, the draftsman's drawings, into those that were produced by a number of different draftsmen. And all I did was convert the number of drawings into percentages. And from that little exercise, lo and behold, what do you find? Well, you find that Christopher Wren himself only produced 10% of all the drawings for St. Paul's Cathedral.
That's
Yep,
quite a
you
lot.
heard me right. Only 10%. And I would say if that, because I actually request, well, looking at some of his drawings, it looks to me as though some of them may have been produced by one of his colleagues, Edward Pierce. Nicholas Hawksmoor, who's a name that many listeners may have heard of, Nicholas Hawksmoor. He produced a church at Spitalfields in East London. He, gosh, my goodness, he produced 100 drawings as against Wren's 23. And these 100 drawings constituted 45% of all the drawings produced for St. Paul's Cathedral. So really, at 45% of all drawings, that was the largest percentage. Why don't we attribute St. Paul's Cathedral to the work of Nicholas Hawksmoor rather than Christopher Wren?
But I could cut in there because what happens, you said a draftsman's person just draws, but really, when you look at, say, let's look at Billingsgate redevelopment. That's a project I worked on there. I designed the top store, the 3 stories on the top there. I did most of the design work there. And you had the main architect that did the main shell of that architect is really a manager, and it's the technicians that actually make sure that everything is designed on there. So really, you'll have, I can't remember which chaps that were there now, that there was a couple of architects and there was about 20 technicians. So really the architect it's a bit like Formula 1 racing. You get the driver that you hear about. Hello? Hello?
I was trying to bring the picture of Gloria's book up and it didn't work.
So I was going to say, you'll get, say, the architect might do, say, some drawings, yes, but it'd be mainly the technicians that make sure that the individual bits are designed, it all fits together. So the architect is more like a manager in many ways.
Although apparently at that time, well, this is what it said on that webpage that was taken down. I'm reading from this book again, which is The Dark Side of Academia. How
Shall I put it up again? Hang on, shall I be a bit flash? Here it goes, look.
Yeah. Which you can buy it, dare I say it, on Amazon. But also you can get it direct from Truth University. And the email, can I say it, Chris?
Certainly.
To write to would be info.truthuniversity@protonmail.com.
Right,
If you don't need to go to Amazon, just go to info.truthuniversity@protonmail.com. And somebody recently emailed me at that email because I say I'm the publisher, and actually asked for 20 copies because having read it, she said that this book in her view, really would help people wake up, because it covers so many topics and shows how, well, truth is covered up, whether in the humanities or the social sciences or the sciences. But anyway, going back to Christopher Wren, according to the website, which has now been taken down, it said, this is on the page headed Wren's Draftsman, it said that the usual hierarchy of the architect's office, whereby the master prepared the sketch for the assistant to work up as a finished drawing, was absent. And they also commented that Wren's own designs were, I'm going to quote exactly what they said. They said that they were drawn, quotes, with great precision and elegance, relying almost entirely on outline to convey three-dimensional architectural form. So what they're saying in a polite way is that his drawings lacked three-dimensionality. I wonder what you make of that, Chris.
Well, that often happens. I mean, you'll get a kind of, hello, something else happening here. You'll get your brief or what needs to be done, and it might be an outline of a floor plan or something like that, and it might be 3 or 4 floors, and you would have to design how the slabs are going to be linked together, the cladding's going to go on the outside, you've got to design the internal side, all that type of thing, the sort of nitty-gritty of it. And people have often accused me of being a deep thinker. Well, you've got to deep think, because you'd be out, so you've got to really think deeply. You've got to think of it in your head in many ways and think very quickly how you're going to put things together. So when you look at, let's say a typical London office, okay, you'll find about half a dozen drawings by the main architect, and then there'll be about hundreds of drawings by all different technicians and all the service engineers, heating and ventilating engineers, designers, there's electrical engineers, and you've all got to liaise with each other. And it'll be the architect who would be like the manager, the overall top, and that's why it takes 7 years to become an architect.
I mean, that may be modern practice, but the website was suggesting
that was
not the norm then. And
yeah.
and
well, I know that
personally, I've looked at some of Wren's drawings, and they seem a pale shadow in terms of
they will be
of some of the other drawings.
I mean, I looked through.
I mean, Hawksmoor's drawings are magnificent. They are works of art. They're extraordinary, and yet he hasn't gone down in history as having played a big part. So I'm just using this program as a chance to plug Nicholas Hawksmoor and his wonderful work.
But it's a bit like with the Billingsgate redevelopment. Now we found from the City of London, we got the original drawings of the basements and that, because we didn't quite know how it was all worked out, because there have been areas that have been bricked up and all that. And we was looking through drawings that were copied, shall we say, microfiches of drawings that were done in the 1880s, 1870s, and they're all done by different people. But the one thing you did notice, there are works of art because they had time to do it. Now there's no time to do it. You know, you've got X amount of time, you do it, and that's it. And if you don't do it, there's somebody else that will. So that's where the pressure comes from and the stress comes from it, because the design period now is actually, that's an overhead. They're trying to make it the minimum time, because you don't want many overheads, because you're there to make money. That's the thing. In those days, they were producing a work of art. So really, Hawksmoor, yes, he it's like everything else. It's I was saying like the other week, we say that who was the first people to fly an aeroplane? It was the Wright brothers. Not quite, because it's debatable whether it was a New Zealand chap, a Brazilian chap, or an English chap, because within about a week or so of each other, they've actually achieved manned flight, manned power. But it's the Wright brothers that got the best publicity. Yeah. So we always say the Wright brothers.
There's the other question: could people fly before planes that were fueled by petrol? And well, that takes us into a whole can of worms about
Oh, yeah.
some of these. Have you seen some of these old photographs of
Oh, yeah.
Paris with the Eiffel Tower and other tall buildings having landing stations on the top? Have you seen any of those?
Yes.
Old? And I saw
Yes.
them with hot air balloons flying. You know, the air was absolutely chock-a-block full of hot air balloons. And I mean, was that a very common form of transport before the aeroplane came into existence? Is that part of human history that they don't want us to know about? That there was a way of fueling air travel that didn't involve using aircraft fuel.
That's correct. Look at the Monrovia brothers. That was what, 17 something or other?
Yeah.
They were one of the first ones. And they used to use them in wartime. I know that in the was it the Prussian War, that they used to have, like, very brave people up in these hot air balloons to see what the enemy was up to.
Yeah.
You know,
shut down.
So,
I went on a Telegram site, and somebody pointed out that a lot of the skies in these old photographs from the 19th century, for example, that these skies seem to be airbrushed out. And maybe it's to conceal the volume of air traffic, but not planes. I'm not talking planes. I'm talking about these hot air balloons that were used before. And there are actually photographs showing people dismounting from these craft. There's so much we don't know, isn't there?
Yeah, there is.
Also, one of the other things we don't know is where is the best place to buy that book for Ancient Ruby?
Yes.
Oh, you mean the book I showed you before? I'll show it to you again. This one.
Yes.
As I say, a lady bought 20 copies, and she lives in Bedfordshire. And having read it, and I said, "Why are you buying 20 copies of this book?" And this is a very interesting and alternative way of carrying out a campaign. She buys these books, and she thinks that this book will wake people up because it goes through many stories and shows that actually the official histories or the official versions of science are concealing what really happened. So she buys these books, and she gives them out to people in her village, often on loan, so that when they bring the book back to her, she can have a conversation with them about the contents.
Right.
Good idea.
And I thought, what an interesting way of running a campaign.
That is excellent. And also, there's a very famous author that's got his name in that book as well, isn't there?
Well, there is no author. No, it's anonymous.
No, but somebody's put what is it, a forward, is there? Is it?
Oh, yes, it's a great thing. Yes, the book itself is written by the secret professor. Wonder who that could be. And then there's a forward from John Hamer, who we all know, and there's an afterword from Dr. Tess Lawrie. And she doesn't mince her words, Dr. Tess Lawrie, who runs the what's it called? The
thingy.
The Alliance on Health. Yes. I'll give you the exact words in a minute. But what does she say about universities? Here we go. This is exactly what she said. She said, after reading The Dark Side of Academia, which is this book, I have come to the conclusion that critical thinking and genius by these legacy institutions. Isn't that?
Actually, you froze when you
said critical thinking and genius have been banished by universities. She goes on to say, and she's a prolific researcher herself. So she's not just going on the information in this book. She said that universities are rotted to the core. As I say, she doesn't mince her words, and are now in need of dismantling before they do any further damage to young minds.
Yeah.
And on page 149 of this book, there's a quote from an article written by two professors, one a professor at Oxford University, very senior person there, and the other a professor at Queensland University. And what both of these professors are saying, and this article appeared on the website of the World Economic Forum, the WEF. What both these professors are saying is that universities, through their teaching and research, must redouble their efforts to work alongside corporations, governments, and NGOs as they search for new business models and policies to assist the Great Reset. So these two senior professors from Queensland and Oxford universities are saying that teaching and research within universities are there to serve the Great Reset.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know what you feel about that. Is that what universities are there for?
It does seem
I
that
don't
way.
think so.
Mm.
It does seem,
I thought that they were there to
well, it should be there to educate. But when you look at what's happening now,
find out truth.
when you look at, for example, the 60s, how things progressed very, very quickly, fashions and all kinds of things like that. Now we're stagnated for years, totally stagnated. But going back to what you were saying about teamwork and that, now apparently the submarine corps, or the branch of the Royal Navy, I probably got that wrong, but shall we say that, I think it's called, is it submarine corps? I think it's called that. They apparently were the type of people that didn't like discipline. And they were a bit sort of anti-establishment. And there was a chap talking about this. I don't know if it's during the Second World War, and the captain read out this note. They all wore sarongs, and this was in the Far East. And he said, "We just had the letter through from the Admiralty that we're not allowed to wear sarongs." He tore it up and threw it over his shoulder. Said, "Okay," just walked out. He's wearing a sarong, and they were stroppy. But you look at how they were in a teamwork, because they got on well, because they're a little bit sort of didn't like the establishment. There had to be. I mean, how anybody could go under in a submarine, I do not know. I think give me 30 seconds, I'd be out of there. But
yeah, I would. Yeah,
no, you couldn't actually, because but quite honestly, they were very successful, and it was the same. Apparently, it's the same with the U-boats during World War II. The U-boat, they were a sort of an elite lot. They were a little bit stroppy, you didn't sort of mess with them, sort of things. And there was something about the mentality of them, but they worked together as a team very, very well.
Well, maybe that's something to do with the leadership. I mean, if we look at somebody like Admiral Nelson, I suspect he was an outstanding leader, and he used to have dinner with his officers the night before a battle in order to not just dictate strategy, but to discuss strategy. He seems to have been an absolutely remarkable man, Nelson.
Well, you've heard the joke about Admiral Nelson. Have you heard that one?
No, I don't know that one.
The lookout at the top says, 4 foggy French ships on the starboard bow. He says, "Hardy, get my red dinner jacket, please." "Really?" He said, "Yes." "What do you want the red dinner jacket?" He says, "Because if I get hit, our men will not see the blood dripping down me."
Oh.
Okay? And you've heard it. And then then suddenly, "My mistake, 40 French ships on the starboard bow. Hardy, get my brown corduroy trousers." Sorry. You probably heard it, Gloria. But no, seriously, when you're looking at things like our history is being erased. Now, I saw the other day that the film The Railway Children, which was made in the late 60s, you see there's a scene, I don't know if you've seen it on Facebook, where there's the children sitting on a fence and look up at the sky, and it's a clear blue sky. And I think Netflix have re-released it, or some firm have re-released it, and they've actually airbrushed chemtrails in the sky. So
that's happening a lot, I believe. Yeah.
You don't need to airbrush them in; they're already there.
Yeah, but
so we need to make sure that we're thinking and looking critically at everything that comes our way these days. And I know we can't put up an image, but I do want to just talk about this very briefly, about this new book.
Yes.
That it was published by Truth University just a few weeks ago, and it's all about the importance of thinking critically. And I've written that book with Catherine Armitage, who coordinates the 5G campaign.
Right.
And all credit to her for doing the work that she does. And we thought it was very important at this juncture in our history, when goodness knows what people are saying that doesn't add up and doesn't make sense, that we actually talked about the importance of critical thinking. And so the book talks about the importance, and would you believe it, organizations such as the BBC and the World Economic Forum, even they talk about the importance of critical thinking. There are references from those organizations, amongst many others. And it goes back a long way. Socrates, he was executed because he was encouraging young people to think critically with a system of questioning. He said a life without investigation is not worth living. I'm sure we'd all agree. And yours. Descartes said that every part of thinking should be questioned, doubted, and tested. I like the use of the word tested at the end, given the last 2 or 3 years. To say what Descartes said again. Every part of thinking should be questioned, doubted, and tested. And Carl Jung, the psychologist, he said that the ability to ask questions is the greatest resource in learning the truth. So questioning is incredibly important. Einstein, he said that question everything. We must question everything. And the book actually shows that there are a number of obstacles to people being able to question. A lot of those obstacles are the thing you were talking about, Chris, groupthink. That it's not okay to say what you really think because of the pressure of the group. And so we have to learn to withstand those pressures. And in fact, in the middle of the book, we present 24 outstanding thought pieces, 24 because there are 24 people who wrote them. And each of those 24 thought pieces describes these people's questioning journeys. And what we find in each case is that where they end up in their lives after a lifetime of questioning is in a very much more exciting place than where they started out. And between these 24, the book covers a whole host of topics from how we question, how we critically think. I have to declare I've written that one. And then there's a piece by Justin Walker on money and how we don't need debt-based money. Governments can print money themselves. That's the Bradbury pound that was produced in 1915. Sir Julian Rose, who's been an organic farmer for much of his life, he talks about the importance of organic farming, non-industrialized farming. And then we've got John Hamer, of course, talking about history and what his light bulb moment was. That's fascinating. It's about a news clip he saw on Princess Diana that was sent to him by friends in France, or at least what they relayed. It's actually what they relayed about a clip they'd seen on TV.
Yeah.
And Mark Devlin talks about his light bulb moment and what changed his life. Then Catherine Armitage herself writes about her journey in trying to cure herself of various ailments that she had. And she went to conventional doctors and eventually found a cure in the area in which she practiced herself, which is homeopathy. And the other contributor on health, who's Eve Gilmore, also ended up as a homeopath, but started out as a conventional nurse working at Bart's. But her journey took her in directions that she couldn't have anticipated. And then there are contributions on philosophy from a Canadian, Matthew Ehret. His wake-up moment was when he was studying film at university. And he was led to believe that creating something ugly was what he should aspire to do. And that was his
brutalism.
Why?
In
Yeah.
architecture.
That changed the course of his life. And then there's a spectacular contribution from Neil Kramer, who's a theologian, and he earns his living as a theologian, guiding people in their lives. And his piece is about how we can choose to react to evil. And he says it quite plainly. We can either choose to profit from it, or we can see it as something that we need to fight back against. And I know which camp you're in, Chris, because you wouldn't be running this program if you were seeking to profit from evil, I don't think.
Well,
then in the last part of the book, we draw this all together and ask, well, what are the triggers for these remarkable people's questioning and critical thinking? And believe it or not, nobody had ever looked at, well, they looked at the obstacles to critical thinking, but they hadn't looked at actually what can encourage us to think critically, which is what we need today. I'm sure we all know friends and family who could do perhaps a bit more critical thinking than we're seeing at the moment. And so we identify through the 24 what these triggers might be. And it transpires that the triggers that animate these people are the self-same triggers that animate the heroes of novels like 1984, Brave New World, and Fahrenheit 451.
Yeah.
Yes.
And they are elements such as curiosity. They say curiosity kills the cat. No, I say curiosity is what fuels life. This is exactly what we need, curiosity. And the influence of parents can go a long way as well. And multiple other factors. I'm looking at the book. We couldn't get it up online. So here's a copy of the book.
Light bulb moments.
And the power of
light bulb moments and the power of critical thinking.
Could you lift it up a little bit more, Gloria, so we can see the bottom bit? That's it. Right, that's lovely.
Yeah. So it's light bulb moments and the power of critical thinking, insights from inquiring minds and literary heroes. So what we find is that Winston Smith, for example, in 1984, I don't think that he's been deplatformed yet, has he, Winston Smith?
Not yet, no.
Most people would still think he was a hero. Well, he shares very similar triggers to his awakening to these 24 people. I'm looking for the table now in the book that lays
and
it
you
out.
get that from your university press, your what we showed up earlier, and I'll put it down.
This book.
Oh, yeah.
So it seems that what a literary hero such as Winston Smith, what gets him asking questions about Big Brother are very similar triggers to those that ignited R24 that I've just talked to you about. So there are things like noticing propaganda, interest in history, curiosity, I mentioned that one, high intelligence. Isn't that interesting? Distrust of authority, a kind of innate distrust of authority, a sense of autonomy, which is what we were talking about earlier, that when a team works well, individuals should have a strong sense of autonomy, shouldn't they?
Yeah.
A high sense of morality, seeing the big picture, refusal to accept the absurd, and influence of parents. All of these things can overcome the multiple obstacles to critical thinking, which include things like groupthink that you were talking about earlier. And television. I mean, television has a very physical effect on our minds because it shuts down the amygdala, which in turn shuts down the prefrontal cortex, and people end up in a hypnotic state when they're sitting.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
And on the internet, I found you can end up like that. But was it tell lie vision, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Tell lie vision.
Yeah, and programming.
Program, yes. And I made a slip because I advertised this show, and I said, "Oh, on next week's program." I thought, "Oh no, it's a show, isn't it?" But
Yes.
also, I think what we've also got to watch out for, and this is the core of the show, is that if you're in a group or anything like truth movement or anything like that, is to watch for signs that there's not the egotists. Watch out for it. And also watch out for signs that it's not going to go into a group formation routine. Because when that happens, then you've got to be very, very careful, because when you get into a group formation, then you get the hive mind. And again, we've all been...
I mean, as I said, television sends people into a hypnotic state.
Yeah.
And fear and anxiety, and we've had a lot of that over the years, haven't we?
This is what egotists do. They create fear and anxiety. Yes.
Fear, when fear is ramped up, that shuts down critical thinking straight away, because people are in fight or fight mode. You know, they haven't got time to stop and think, so we must try and put ourselves in a positive state, not a fearful state, because that will do a lot to help us retain our critical thinking faculties. And so it's all very exciting, really, that Catherine Armitage and I are starting a campaign now in critical thinking, because it's very important that we revive this, in some ways, lost art. They don't teach critical thinking much in schools anymore. In the national curriculum, it's only included in 3 subjects, 2 of which are history and fine art, or art and design. It's not taught across the board, and it's not taught by and large in universities either.
No.
And so this is why there was a very recent report, August last year now, 2022. It came out at the end of August last year, a report on the incidence of critical thinking in new graduates across the world, in 6 countries across. And the results of that report, well, I'll tell you what it said. It's pretty damning of universities. It said that only 45% of graduates in 6 countries, and that included the US, Mexico, UK, Inland, let me just say it again, US, Mexico, UK, Chile, Finland, and Italy. And the survey involved 800,000 students. Only 45% of graduates in these 6 countries demonstrated critical thinking skills at the end of their degrees. That's less than half. And this was reduced in just August, a few months ago. They said that the learning gain of students between the start and the end of their course was small on average. That means they're going in with a certain level of critical thinking, and they're coming out with a very similar level of critical thinking at the end. And here's the final irony. They found big discrepancies between courses and fields. And would you believe it, that those fields most closely aligned to real-world occupations, for example, business studies, health and science, scored the lowest scores. And it was humanities students, and the British government is cutting back on humanity courses.
I wonder why.
Funding for humanities courses. It was the humanities students who showed the highest scores in critical thinking.
Well, if you walk around,
we need to revive this art of critical thinking, which has not been substantially taught in either schools or in universities. Sorry, Chris, I interrupted.
I've chimed in on you. I'm terribly sorry, but what I was going to say is that you look around, say we all walk into buildings and things like that. You look at a bad design, and you can almost guarantee that at the brainstorming sessions, when they're all sitting around trying to work things out, you had a situation. I mean, I worked on some projects where people, all right, you've only got a limited time to design this thing. You've got to get the work done. And you're sitting there, and there's the this is when they used to be allowed to smoke. I've never smoked. You get the old chain smokers like this and dabbing it out, and very worried. And I've been in a situation where you've got creative people all around. You've got ideas, but you're frightened to mention them because you're frightened of being laughed at.
Yeah.
Because sometimes you think out of the box, you come up with something that's absolutely wacky as hell, and you get all this, and then you get the egotists come in.
That's because this suboptimal culture has been created. And when we were chatting the other day, Chris, we both came up with a very different example, didn't we, from 3M, which is an American company that actually allowed their employees a certain time each week to experiment and be creative.
Correct.
And you tell us what one
Well, what
person discovered.
happened?
in 3M.
A chap discovered he came up with this glue, and it wasn't particularly good. And he went to church, and he found it was very useful to put it on this paper and stick it in the individual pages of his Bible so he can refer to things. And people thought, well, that's good. And all around his church, they was getting these notes. And that's where stick-it notes came from. And it's an absolute worldwide success. It was 3M, and it was from a failure because he was allowed to experiment. He wasn't laughed at. And he experimented with this glue, which is a bit rubbish, but it's just perfect for a stick-it note. And you know what I was going to say about the design thing. I've worked in other offices where people have come out with wacky things, nobody laughs, and somebody else will say, hang on a minute, that's a good idea.
Yeah.
And somebody else, yeah, I've worked on that. But I've also had the weird experience, which is probably for another show, and that is, I didn't say program, and that is where you might have a problem. You come up with the answer, and as the words are coming out of your mouth, a couple of other people have got to that answer exactly the same time.
Yeah.
How has that happened? And it might be like out the wall, you know, you're thinking really deeply on these things, and you know, everybody's thinking deeply. There must be something going on there. But this is the thing, you know, when you've been into the places like that where you're frightened of anything, and I think this is what's happening now in universities. People are frightened to step outside the box, and this is why you've got archaeology, for example. Archaeologists, you've got this set sort of phrase, and you've got people that, as that chap, can't think of his name now, who's not an archaeologist, he's a journalist, and he's found out that it looks as if humanity is almost wiped off the map 10,400 years ago. Is that to start again? And there was an advanced culture years ago. I can see his face, but I can't think of his name, but people know who he
I
is.
think people have said that there have been at least 2 resets in the past.
Yeah.
And hey, they want to push us towards the 3rd one. Are we going to go there? Into the 3rd Great Reset?
No. Well, we've got to win. There's no other word, another thing. Failure isn't, you know, we're in this. Failure isn't an option.
Human beings are creative creatures, as you said, Chris. And we must be allowed to accept creativity.
Well, that's right.
And the future can be exciting.
It can be, but again, watch for the egotists. Watch for the egotists. That's the problem.
I think so.
Yes.
Should we go back into chat? Because Ancient Rubies said, how did Chris and Gloria meet? I don't know. How did we meet, Gloria? I can't remember.
That's a really good. I think it may have been John Hamer that introduced us.
Might have been, yes.
Because that's somebody we have in common. And John Hamer is a brilliant writer, and he is a regular at the conferences.
Yeah.
And in fact, shall I do a plug for the next conference? That's
right.
I think you managed to get that one up. Well, thanks to Debs.
Was this Ancient Ruby? Pardon me. The reset is
designed. Say this next conference is not until August next year.
Yes.
Right, here it comes. I like this.
Well done, brilliant.
Applause.
So there's John Hamer, and I think he's the source of our knowing each other.
Yes.
And this is Questioning Science next August up in the Peak District, which is a beautiful part of the world. And we were there last year, and I'd never really explored it. We went off to Buxton, which was a lovely place. We were looking for looking at the design histories of the buildings there. I mean, Buxton has had the largest unsupported dome in the world in the 19th century. Did you know that?
Yes.
And it was a bit strange because the chap that they alleged had designed this absolutely astonishing structure was somebody who was alleged to have been the son of a stonemason with no training whatsoever.
Wow.
And here we were looking at this, what's the real story behind that, we were asking ourselves. Sometimes it's important to ask the questions, even if you don't know the answers. So next year, this is our program for next year. And Mark Devlin's got a couple of really interesting talks there. Well, he always has interesting talks on the subliminal mind. And Trevor Gunn is a homeopath, and he'll be talking about his understanding of the nature of disease, which is probably very different from the sort of view that you might get from a mainstream doctor. And he'll be looking at the immune system.
Catherine Armitage, Gloria
Yes,
Moss.
Catherine's talking about homeopathy and why have so many countries around the world felt so strongly about homeopathy as to want to shut it down. That's the case of France, Germany, Britain.
I think we all know the answer to that one.
We all know the answer.
What's the answer, Debs?
Well, I can't say it, but
we can't say, can we? But
the words start with BP.
Yes.
And it's not a petroleum company.
Mm.
And I think Dr. Miles Fleetwood knows the answer to that one and all.
Yes.
And what else have we got? Rosalind Palmer is talking about epigenetics. Epigenetics, difficult word to say.
Bruce Lipton, Dr. Bruce Lipton.
How, yes, that's his thing, and how we can actually, through our mind, influence cellular activity.
T. Moss, who's T. Moss?
And this is something that Debs could perhaps tell us about. Professor David Healy, who is a professor of mental health, I think he trained as a psychiatrist. He's out in Canada, so he'll be Zooming his talk. Right. He talks about how management can interfere with good mental health solutions.
Yes.
And John Hamer, last but not least, well, he's going to put his toe in the water of...
Oh, yes, I think we can see that, yes.
Yeah, I don't need to read that one out, do I?
No,
he'll talk about suppressed technology. And what's the third thing say? Oh, yes.
Our 3 men went to the moon in a tin can.
Landings.
Yes.
Yeah.
and there's more. There's stuff I'm doing. And more. And probably by the time we get to August, there'll be some more presenters on board.
That's
so
brilliant.
If you don't know what to do for your summer holes,
there you go.
Mix with like-minded people, brilliant speakers in a lovely part of Britain. And if you'd like to contact us, it's learning holidays at protonmail.com.
I'll put this down below after the show. So it'll be a couple of days because I'm a lazy sod before it comes down. At least I'm honest. Before it goes down to the comments. And remember, you can actually see this on BitChute as well. I've got a BitChute channel. So I think we better round things up now. Have you anything to round up on, Gloria?
Well, I just think here we are. It's is it the 2nd of January?
Is it? Yes, it is.
Right at the beginning of the new year. We can still make resolutions, can we, at this point?
Yeah, why
not? What should our resolution be, do you think, in terms of
victory?
How we work in groups? Any thoughts?
Victory.
Yes. Question everything.
Also, watch out.
Collaborate in a good sense.
Yeah.
And also, watch out for the infiltrators. That's what my grandfather used to say. Always watch out. Look, son, watch out for the infiltrators. I didn't know what he was on about when I was a kid, but now I do.
There you go, you say.
Yeah. but also, watch out for the egotists.
Yes.
Yeah.
They're the ones. Well, thank you very much for joining us, Gloria. It's great, isn't it? I really enjoyed this. And thanks, Deb. And we'll be back next week. Now, I've got some feedback from Shannon, and she said later on in January she'll be doing the numerology show because it's a bit too cold there at the moment. We won't go into details, but she lives in the middle of nowhere, and so she'll be back talking about numerology. So join us next week, 8 o'clock, same time, same place.
Yes.
And Happy New Year, everybody.
Yes, Happy New Year.
Remember, shut your butts up. And whatever happens, I tell you our greatest weapon, Gloria and Deb, I think we've all got, that the psychos haven't got, humour. Laugh at them. And whatever happens, have a laugh.
Yes.
That's what they're frightened of. So, see you next week. And should we do the old outro now?
Yeah, I've
Thank
got
you
it.
very much. Good
Bye.
night.
Bye.
Bye.